The scalding water splashed across my face as the kettle crashed inches from my skull. I stumbled backward, clutching Ethan to my chest as his screams pierced through the ringing in my ears. My father stood over us, his face twisted with rage, the kitchen towel still wrapped around his hand. This was it. This was the moment I realized my family wanted me dead. But before I tell you how I escaped this nightmare and made them pay for every single moment of torment, if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life stories, and drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Your support means everything. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I was 23 when I became a mother to Ethan. His father, Marcus, had been my high school sweetheart, the boy I thought I would marry. We had been together for 5 years when I got pregnant. I remember the joy I felt when I saw those 2 pink lines, imagining our future together. But Marcus saw something different. He saw his freedom disappearing, his dreams of traveling and building his career crumbling. 3 days after I told him, he was gone. No forwarding address, no phone number, just a note saying he wasn't ready to be a father and that I should do what I thought was best. I tried to make it on my own. I really did. I worked at a diner during my pregnancy, saving every tip, every dollar. I rented a studio apartment in the cheapest part of town, where sirens wailed through the night, and I had to check my shoes for cockroaches every morning. I told myself I could do this, that I would be enough for my baby. But after Ethan was born, reality hit hard. Childcare costs more than my rent. I was exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep, trying to work double shifts while recovering from a difficult delivery. My savings evaporated within 2 months. That's when I called my parents. I hadn't spoken to them much during my pregnancy. My mother had made it clear she was disappointed in me for getting pregnant out of wedlock, saying it reflected poorly on the family. But I was desperate, and they were my only option. When I asked if I could come home temporarily, just until I got back on my feet, my father sighed heavily and said, "I suppose we don't have a choice. Family is family." After all, I should have recognized that sigh for what it was. Resignation. Not welcome. Obligation. Not love. When I arrived at their house with 3-month-old Ethan, my younger sister Victoria was there. At 21, she was everything I had never been. Tall, blonde, with the kind of effortless beauty that turned heads everywhere she went. She had a trust fund from our grandmother that I had never received, though no one ever explained why. She was in her senior year of college, studying marketing, and had grand plans of becoming an influencer or working in fashion. Victoria looked at Ethan with barely concealed disgust. "Is it going to cry all the time?" she asked, as if he were a puppy I had brought home without permission. "Babies cry, Victoria. That's what they do," I said, trying to keep my voice light. She wrinkled her nose. "Well, just keep it away from my stuff." My parents, Richard and Eleanor, had always favored Victoria. I had accepted this as a fact of life growing up. I was the plain one, the studious one, the one who worked summer jobs and got scholarships, while Victoria was handed everything. When Victoria wanted a car for her 16th birthday, she got a brand new Lexus. When I turned 16, I got a card with $50 in it. When Victoria needed money for sorority dues, my father wrote a check without blinking. When I needed help with textbooks, I was told to get a job. I had convinced myself that this favoritism was just their way, that they loved us both but showed it differently. Moving back home shattered that illusion completely. The first week was tolerable. I stayed in my old bedroom, which had been converted into a storage room, but still had my twin bed. I was grateful to have a roof over my head and tried to be as unobtrusive as possible. I cooked dinner every night, cleaned the kitchen, did laundry. I thought if I made myself useful, if I contributed, they would see that I wasn't a burden. But Victoria saw my presence as an opportunity. She started small, testing boundaries. She would blast music late at night, waking Ethan. Then, act offended when I asked her to turn it down. She would use all the hot water in the morning, knowing I needed to shower before my shift at the diner. She would eat the food I bought specifically for Ethan, then shrug and say she didn't realize it was his. My parents never corrected her. In fact, they seemed to find it amusing. My mother would giggle when Victoria mocked the way I dressed for work in my diner uniform. My father would smirk when Victoria complained about Ethan's crying disturbing her sleep. Even though her bedroom was on the opposite side of the house, 1 month turned into 2, then 3. I was working 6 days a week, sometimes double shifts, desperately trying to save enough for a deposit on an apartment. But every time I got close, something would happen. My car would break down. Ethan would get sick and need medicine. My father would present me with a bill for groceries or utilities, claiming I needed to pay my share. Even though the amounts he demanded seemed arbitrary and excessive, I started to realize that they were keeping me trapped. Every dollar I earned went right back into their pockets, ensuring I could never leave. But I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed to work harder, save smarter, be more patient. Victoria's treatment of Ethan grew worse as he got older. When he started crawling, she would deliberately leave small objects on the floor, things that could choke him. When I confronted her, she laughed and said, "Maybe you should watch your kid better." When he started walking, she would stick her foot out to trip him, then act shocked when he fell and cried. My parents witnessed these incidents and said nothing. Or worse, they would tell me I was being oversensitive. The psychological abuse was relentless. My father had a way of making every conversation feel like an interrogation. Still working at that pathetic diner. Can't get a real job. He would ask this in front of relatives during family gatherings, his voice dripping with condescension. My mother would add little comments about my appearance, my parenting, my life choices. "You've really let yourself go, Sarah. No wonder Marcus left. A man needs a woman who takes care of herself." Victoria was the cruelest. Though, she seemed to study me, learning exactly which words would cut deepest. She would talk about her exciting life, her dates with successful men, her bright future, all while looking at me with pity. It must be so hard, being a single mom with no prospects. I mean, who's going to want you now? You come with so much baggage. I absorbed it all. I told myself that words couldn't hurt me, that I was strong enough to endure anything for Ethan's sake. I worked. I saved. I survived. But inside, something was dying. My sense of self-worth eroded a little more each day. When Ethan turned 2, Victoria started getting physical with him. It began with rough handling, grabbing his arm too tightly when moving him out of her way, pushing him aside when he got near her belongings. Then it escalated to pinching. I would find small bruises on his arms and legs. And when I asked him what happened, he would look scared and say, "Auntie Vicky." I confronted Victoria in front of my parents. "You're hurting him. Stop touching my son." She laughed. That tinkling laugh she used when she wanted to sound innocent. "Oh my God. Sarah, you're so paranoid." I barely touched him. "He's just clumsy." My father's face darkened. "Are you accusing your sister of child abuse?" "I'm saying she needs to be more careful with him. He's a toddler. Maybe you need to toughen him up instead of coddling him." My mother chimed in. "You're going to raise a weak, pathetic boy if you keep babying him." I felt my face flush with anger, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't afford to make waves. I had $700 saved. I needed at least $2,000 for a deposit and first month's rent. I just had to last a few more months. But Victoria sensed my helplessness, and it emboldened her. She started doing things that she knew would provoke me. She would take Ethan's favorite toy and hide it. Watching him cry and search frantically, she would tell him scary stories that gave him nightmares. She would mock his speech, imitating his toddler pronunciation and laughing cruelly. The worst incident before the breaking point happened when Ethan was 3. I had worked a double shift and came home exhausted to find Ethan locked in the bathroom, sobbing hysterically. Victoria had apparently decided he needed to learn to use the toilet properly and had locked him in there for over an hour, ignoring his cries. When I got him out, his face was red and blotchy, his voice hoarse from screaming. I was shaking with rage. I marched into the living room where Victoria was painting her nails, completely unbothered. "What the hell is wrong with you? He's 3 years old, you can't lock him in a room." She didn't even look up. "He needs to learn discipline. You're too soft on him." I turned to my parents, who were sitting right there. "Did you know she locked him in the bathroom?" My mother sipped her tea. Victoria was just trying to help with potty training. By traumatizing him, my father stood up, his voice booming. Enough, Victoria was doing you a favor. You should be grateful someone is willing to help with that boy since you clearly can't handle him on your own. That night, I held Ethan as he slept, his little body still shaking with residual sobs. I looked at the small amount of money I had saved, feeling the weight of impossibility pressing down on me. I needed to get out, but I had nowhere to go. I had systematically lost contact with most of my friends during my years with Marcus, and then the chaos of single motherhood. My extended family all lived far away and had their own problems. I was alone, and my family knew it. I started picking up every extra shift I could. Even if it meant leaving Ethan with my parents more often, I hated doing it. But I told myself it was temporary, that each hour of work brought us closer to freedom. What I didn't realize was that leaving him with them more frequently gave them more opportunities to break him down, to teach him that he was worthless. Just like they had taught me. The financial exploitation intensified. My father started presenting me with detailed spreadsheets of household expenses, demanding I pay half of everything, including his premium cable package and my mother's shopping habits. When I protested that I was already contributing more than my share, he would threaten to kick me out immediately. Knowing I had nowhere to go, Victoria started borrowing money with increasing frequency. $20 here, $50 there. Always with a promise to pay me back that never materialized. When I stopped giving her money, she retaliated by destroying things. She spilled coffee on my work uniform. She broke Ethan's toys. She deleted important messages from my phone when I left it unattended. The psychological warfare was exhausting. I felt like I was going insane. They would gaslight me constantly, denying things I had clearly seen or heard, making me question my own memory and perception. They would make plans and deliberately exclude me and Ethan, then act surprised when I felt hurt. They would criticize everything I did, every decision I made, until I second-guessed even the smallest choices. By the time Ethan turned 4, I was a shell of my former self. I worked mechanically, came home, took care of Ethan, and tried to be invisible. I had given up on saving money because it seemed impossible. I had accepted that this was my life now, that I deserved this punishment for the sin of getting pregnant and being abandoned. I stopped dreaming about the future because the present was consuming me entirely. The verbal abuse reached new heights of cruelty. My father would tell me I was a waste of space, that I should have given Ethan up for adoption because I was too incompetent to be a mother. My mother would compare me constantly to Victoria, listing all the ways I had failed as a daughter and as a woman. Victoria would bring her friends over and talk about me in the third person while I was in the room, discussing my failures and shortcomings as if I were an object, not a person. One particularly awful evening, about 3 months before the breaking point, I overheard a conversation that should have been my wake-up call. I was putting Ethan to bed, and their voices carried up from the living room. Victoria was complaining about something, and my father was consoling her. "Don't worry, sweetie. Sarah will handle it. That's what she's here for." "But Daddy, I'm so tired of having them here. She's such a downer. And that kid is annoying." My mother's voice joined in. "Accidents happen, Victoria, especially when trash competes with beauty. Things have a way of working themselves out." There was something in her tone, something cold and calculated, that sent ice through my veins. But I was so beaten down, so exhausted, that I couldn't fully process what she might have meant. I just pulled Ethan closer and tried to shut out their voices. The physical abuse of Ethan continued to escalate. Victoria would grab him by his shirt and shake him when she was frustrated. She would yank him by his arm hard enough to make him yelp in pain. She would push him down onto furniture or the floor, always making sure to do it when I wasn't looking. Though my parents certainly saw and did nothing, I tried to protect him. I kept him with me as much as possible. I would take him to work and let him sit in the break room during my shifts, bringing coloring books and toys to keep him occupied. But I couldn't shield him completely, and the damage was being done. He became a nervous, jumpy child, always looking over his shoulder, flinching when anyone moved too quickly near him. I should have left then. I should have packed our things and walked out. Consequences be damned. But I was paralyzed by fear and the systematic destruction of my self-esteem. They had convinced me that I was nothing without them, that I would fail on my own, that I would end up homeless with my child taken away by the state. I believed them because I had heard it so many times that it had become my truth. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I had finally managed to take a day off work because Ethan had a doctor's appointment for his annual checkup. The appointment went well. Ethan was healthy, developing normally, despite everything, and the pediatrician praised me for being such an attentive mother. It was one of the few moments of validation I had received in years, and I held on to it like a lifeline as we drove home. When we got back to the house around 2 in the afternoon, I was actually feeling optimistic. I had been secretly meeting with a social worker I had connected with through the hospital, and she had given me information about emergency housing assistance programs. It would mean starting over with nothing, but it was a possibility. A crack in the prison walls. I started preparing dinner early because I had to work the evening shift. Ethan was in the living room, playing quietly with his toy cars on the carpet. Richard and Eleanor were on the couch watching one of their shows. Victoria was supposedly at a friend's house. Everything seemed normal, almost peaceful. I was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, mentally calculating how many more shifts I needed to work before I could make a move, when I heard Ethan scream. Not a tantrum scream or an I hurt myself playing scream. A scream of pure terror that made every maternal instinct in my body explode into action. I dropped the knife and ran into the living room. What I saw made my blood freeze. Victoria, who I thought was out, was sitting on top of my 4-year-old son, her full weight pressing him into the hardwood floor. She had her knees pinning his small arms down, and one of her hands was holding his head against the floor, while the other hand was covering his mouth, muffling his screams. His face was bright red, tears streaming down his cheeks, his eyes wide with terror, and she was laughing, actually laughing. A cruel, delighted sound. That didn't seem human. What's the matter, little man? She cooed mockingly. Can't handle a little rough housing, you're so weak. Just like your pathetic mother. She lifted her leg slightly and then brought her foot down in a kick to his ribs. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to hurt, to humiliate, to traumatize. Ethan's muffled scream intensified. My parents sat on the couch less than 5 feet away. My father's eyes were on the television. My mother was reading a magazine. Neither of them reacted at all, as if a grown woman torturing a child was perfectly normal background noise. Something inside me that had been bending for years finally snapped. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the beaten-down acceptance exploded into pure rage. I lunged forward with a strength I didn't know I possessed and shoved Victoria off of Ethan with enough force that she stumbled backward and fell on her rear end. I scooped Ethan into my arms. He was gasping for air, his whole body trembling. I could see the red marks on his arms where her knees had dug in, the imprint of her hand on his mouth. His ribs would probably bruise. I turned to face my family, my whole body shaking with an emotion beyond anger. What the hell is wrong with you? Victoria, don't you ever touch my son again. Victoria's shock at being shoved quickly morphed into theatrical indignation. She stood up, brushing off her designer jeans, her face contorting into expression of wounded innocence that would have been laughable if the situation weren't so horrific. Oh my God. Sarah. We were just playing. He's so weak and sensitive. Just like you. I was trying to toughen him up because clearly you're raising him to be a little crybaby. Toughen him up. He's 4 years old. You were suffocating him, you kicked him. I barely touched him. She scoffed. Stop being so dramatic. This is why everyone thinks you're insane. I turned to my parents, desperate for someone, anyone, to acknowledge the insanity of what I had just witnessed. Did you see what she did? Did you see her attacking him? My mother looked up from her magazine with an expression of bored annoyance. Victoria was just playing with the boy. He needs to learn to be tougher. You coddle him too much. She was hurting him. That's when my father stood up. I had seen him angry many times over the years, had weathered countless storms of his rage, but this was different. His face was red, a vein pulsing visibly in his temple. His jaw was clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. His eyes held a coldness, a hatred so pure and undiluted that it made me take an involuntary step backward. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me with those cold eyes, letting the silence stretch out. letting the tension build. Then, slowly, deliberately, he walked past me into the kitchen. I heard him opening cabinets. The clink of ceramic, the rustle of fabric. When he emerged, he was holding the electric kettle I had just boiled for tea, gripping it with a thick kitchen towel wrapped around the handle. The kettle was still plugged in, still hot, steam rising from the spout. He walked toward me with measured, purposeful steps. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was frozen, holding Ethan tighter against my chest. My father's eyes never left mine as he raised the kettle high above his head and then brought it down with a violent force onto the granite countertop right next to where I stood. The impact was catastrophic. The lid flew off from the force, and boiling water exploded outward like a geyser. I felt the scalding heat splash across my face, my neck, my arm. Ethan shrieked and buried his face in my shoulder, and I twisted my body to shield him from the spray. The pain was immediate and intense, my skin screaming where the hot water had made contact. The kettle itself cracked from the impact but didn't shatter completely. My father left it there, steam still rising from it, water pooling on the counter and dripping onto the floor. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the coffee on his breath. And when he spoke, his voice was low and measured, each word enunciated with deadly precision. Listen to me very carefully, you worthless piece of trash. In this house, Victoria is first. She is everything. She is the daughter we are proud of. The daughter who matters. You are nothing. You are less than nothing. You have no rights here. No say in how things are done. You are a broke whore who couldn't keep a man, who got knocked up and had to come crawling back home with your bastard child because you're too incompetent to survive on your own. He paused, letting his words sink in, then continued. We let you stay here out of the goodness of our hearts. And this is how you repay us, by attacking your sister, by causing problems, by disrespecting us in our own home. My mother still hadn't looked up from her magazine. She took a delicate sip of her tea and said, in the most casual tone imaginable, such a filthy, ungrateful child, always making scenes, always causing drama. We should have disowned you years ago. Victoria stood behind them, arms crossed over her chest, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She had won, and she knew it. She had pushed and pushed until I finally reacted. And now, I was the villain of the story. My father straightened up, smoothing his shirt. Now clean up this mess. And don't you ever raise your voice to Victoria again? If you don't like the rules of this house, you're welcome to leave. But we both know you have nowhere to go. So shut your mouth. Do as you're told. And be grateful. We haven't thrown you out on the street where you belong. He turned and walked back to the couch, settling into his recliner as if nothing had happened. My mother turned a page in her magazine. Victoria pulled out her phone and started scrolling through social media, occasionally glancing up at me with that smug smile. I stood there in the kitchen, Ethan sobbing against my chest, boiling water still dripping onto the floor, my face and arm burning from the scalding spray. My reflection in the kitchen window showed red marks blooming on my cheek and neck, the skin already starting to blister slightly. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what was happening inside me. In that moment, every excuse I had made for them disintegrated, every hope that they might change, every belief that they loved me deep down, every rationalization that this was somehow normal or acceptable, it all burned away. Like fog in sunlight. I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't flawed parents struggling to do their best. They were abusers who had found in me a perfect victim. Someone too beaten down and afraid to fight back. Someone they could use and torture with impunity. And they were doing the same thing to my son. They were teaching him that he deserved abuse, that he should accept cruelty as normal, that his pain didn't matter. They were breaking him the same way they had broken me. And if I didn't stop it now, he would grow up to be another me. Another victim accepting whatever scraps of humanity people chose to throw at him. Something changed in me in that moment. The fear that had controlled me for so long didn't disappear, but it was joined by something stronger. A cold, cristalline clarity. A determination made of steel. I wasn't just Sarah anymore, the scared, beaten down single mother. I was a woman who had reached the absolute limit of what she could endure. And when you push someone to that limit, they become dangerous. I didn't say anything to them. I took Ethan upstairs to our room, locked the door, and tended to his injuries and my own. I put cold compresses on the red marks on his arms and ribs. I treated the burns on my face and neck with burn cream from the first aid kit. And while I did this, while Ethan gradually calmed down and his sobs turned to hiccups and then to silence, I made a decision. I wasn't going to run away. I wasn't going to just escape. I was going to make sure they faced consequences for what they had done. Not just to me, but to my son. And I was going to do it the right way. The legal way. The way that would ensure they couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. That night, after they had all gone to bed, I sat in the dark of my room with my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the darkness. Ethan slept fitfully beside me, occasionally whimpering in his sleep. I started researching child protective services, assault laws, recording consent laws in our state, housing assistance programs, legal aid services, victim advocacy groups. I learned that in our state, I was legally allowed to record conversations in my own home for the purpose of documenting abuse. I learned about emergency protective orders. I learned about mandatory reporters and what constituted evidence of child abuse. I researched criminal charges, civil suits, restraining orders. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just absorbed information like a sponge, my mind working faster and clearer than it had in years. By the time dawn broke, I had a plan. It would take time. It would require patience and stealth. But I would document everything they did, build an irrefutable case. And then, I would destroy them with the same cold efficiency with which they had tried to destroy me. The next morning, I went to work as usual. But during my break, I made several important stops. I went to an electronics store and bought a set of tiny wireless cameras, the kind used for home security, advertised as nanny cams. They were expensive, nearly wiping out what little I had saved. But they were worth it. I also bought a small voice-activated recorder that could fit in my pocket. Over the next few days, I carefully installed the cameras in key locations. One behind a picture frame in the living room, angled to capture the couch and the area where Ethan usually played. One in the kitchen, hidden inside a decorative tea canister on top of the refrigerator, with a view of the table and counters. The cameras were motion-activated and uploaded footage directly to a cloud storage account I created under a fake name. I started wearing the voice recorder in my pocket at all times when I was home. I kept my phone charged and ready, the recording app just one tap away. Every interaction, every conversation, every incident was now being documented. My family noticed that something had changed in me, but they couldn't quite identify what. I had become even quieter than before, speaking only when necessary. My responses short and emotionless. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't react to their provocations. I just existed, moving through the house like a ghost, watching and recording everything. This new version of me made them uncomfortable. Victoria tried harder to get a reaction, her provocations becoming more blatant and cruel. She would deliberately knock things out of Ethan's hands. She would make loud noises right next to his ear to startle him. She would call him names, stupid and worthless and unwanted, trying to make him cry, so she could watch me suffer. But I stayed calm. I would comfort Ethan quietly, move him away from Victoria, and say nothing. My phone recorded everything. The cameras captured everything. I was building my case brick by brick. I also started reaching out to people outside the house. There was a waitress at the diner, Maria, who had always been kind to me. One day during a slow shift, I casually mentioned that I was having some family troubles and asked if she knew any resources for people in difficult situations. She gave me the number of a women's shelter and the name of a social worker she had worked with years ago when she left her abusive husband. I called the social worker, Jennifer Reeves, from a payphone during my lunch break. I told her a brief version of what was happening. She was alarmed and wanted to act immediately, but I asked her to wait. I needed more evidence. I told her I needed to make sure the case was airtight. She reluctantly agreed but made me promise to call her immediately if the situation escalated to where Ethan or I were in immediate danger. I also befriended our neighbor, Mrs. Elena Martinez. She was a retired teacher in her late 60s, a widow who spent her days tending to her immaculate garden and caring for her 3 cats. I had always sensed that she was more observant than she let on, that she saw more than she acknowledged. I started bringing her fresh vegetables from my grocery shopping, ostensibly because I had bought too much. I would help her carry her groceries from her car. I would ask her advice about gardening, about cooking, about life. We developed a friendship, and gradually, carefully, I began to let her see glimpses of what was happening in my house. I never came right out and told her I was being abused. I never asked her directly to be a witness, but I made sure she saw things. I made sure she heard things. One day, Victoria screamed at Ethan in the front yard, calling him worthless trash, and I saw Mrs. Martinez pause in her gardening, her face troubled. Another time, my father berated me on the front porch for some imagined transgression, his voice loud enough to carry across the yards, and I saw Mrs. Martinez's curtains move as she watched. She never said anything directly, but her kindness toward me increased. She started inviting Ethan and me over for cookies. She would give me little gifts, homemade old toys, from when her own children were young. She was building her own understanding of the situation, and I knew that when the time came, she would stand with me. Meanwhile, at home, the abuse continued to escalate. My family seemed to interpret my silence as submission, as a sign that they had finally broken me completely. They became more brazen, more cruel, more confident in their power over me. My father's financial exploitation intensified. He presented me with a bill for over $2,000, claiming it was back rent and utilities I owed for the year. The amount was absurd, calculated to ensure I could never save enough to leave. When I asked for an itemized breakdown, he slammed his fist on the table and told me I had 1 week to pay or I would be evicted. I paid it. I gave him nearly every cent I had. Money I had been hiding in my car. Money I had been saving in desperate hope. But before I handed it over, I had him write a receipt, and I took pictures of it with my phone. Documentation. Evidence. Victoria's treatment of Ethan reached new levels of cruelty. She started waking him up in the middle of the night, shaking him awake and screaming in his face about imagined wrongdoings. She would steal his snacks and eat them in front of him, laughing at his tears. She told him repeatedly that he was stupid, that he was ugly, that nobody wanted him, that he had ruined my life. My mother's psychological warfare was more subtle but equally damaging. She would sigh dramatically whenever Ethan entered a room. She would talk about what a burden grandchildren were, how they ruined people's lives, how some women just weren't cut out to be mothers. All of this while looking directly at me, but I recorded it all. Every word, every action, every moment of cruelty was captured on video or audio. I also started keeping a detailed journal, writing down dates, times, descriptions of incidents, my observations, Ethan's reactions. I wrote about the burns on my face from the boiling water, took pictures of them as they healed. I documented the bruises on Ethan's arms, the scratch marks, the changes in his behavior. I was methodical, almost obsessive. Every morning before work, I would review the footage from the cameras, download anything significant to multiple backup drives, and add entries to my journal. I was building a case that would be impossible to refute, a mountain of evidence that would bury them. 3 weeks into my documentation phase, I had a close call that almost destroyed everything. Victoria found one of my backup drives. I had been stupid, leaving it in a jacket pocket in the hall closet. She came into the kitchen, waving it triumphantly. "What's this?" "Sarah, are you stealing from us now? Copying our personal files?" My heart stopped. Everything hung in the balance. If she looked at that drive, if she saw what was on it, they would destroy the evidence and probably me along with it. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice level. "It's my backup drive for work. My manager asked me to bring home some of the schedule files to review." "You're lying. You don't do that kind of work at the diner." "It's for the manager's scheduling system. She's been having computer problems and asked me to help. You can check with her if you want." Victoria studied me suspiciously, turning the drive over in her hands. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, with a disgusted sound, she tossed it back at me. It hit my chest and clattered to the floor. Whatever. I don't care about your pathetic job anyway. I picked up the drive with shaking hands and immediately hid it in my car. That night, I created an online cloud backup system and uploaded everything. I would never risk physical storage alone again. The close call rattled me but also strengthened my resolve. I became even more careful, even more meticulous. I varied my hiding places. I used encrypted files. I created multiple backups across different platforms. As I gathered evidence, I also started preparing for the aftermath. I contacted legal aid and was connected with a lawyer named Elizabeth Harding, who specialized in family law and domestic violence cases. She agreed to take my case pro bono when I showed her a fraction of what I had documented. "Sarah," she said during our first meeting at a coffee shop, far from my neighborhood, "this is one of the most clear-cut cases of child abuse and domestic violence I've ever seen. When you're ready to move forward, we'll have everything we need. I want to make sure it's airtight." I told her, "I want to make sure they can't wriggle out of this. I want consequences." She nodded seriously. "We'll get you those consequences. But you need to be prepared. This will be brutal. They will attack your character, your mental health, your fitness as a mother. They will try to paint you as unstable. As vindictive. Can you handle that?" "I've been handling their abuse for years," I said. "I can handle a courtroom." 6 weeks into my documentation, the situation at home had deteriorated to the point where I was genuinely afraid that something catastrophic might happen. Victoria's violence toward Ethan was increasing in frequency and intensity. My father's rage was a constant presence, bubbling just under the surface, ready to explode at any moment. My mother's cold indifference had somehow become even more chilling. I started sleeping with my keys and my phone under my pillow, ready to grab Ethan and run if necessary. I had an emergency bag packed in my car with clothes, documents, and cash. I had memorized the address of the nearest women's shelter. I was prepared to flee at a moment's notice. But I also knew that fleeing wasn't enough. If I just ran, they would face no consequences. They would tell whatever story they wanted about me, paint me as unstable or vindictive, and continue their lives unbothered. Victoria would find new victims to torment. My parents would continue to be pillars of their community, respected and admired while hiding their rot behind closed doors. No, I needed to see this through. I needed to make sure that when I left with my head high and with them facing the full weight of what they had done. The final catalyst, the event that would bring everything to a head, came on a Saturday morning in October. The autumn air was crisp, leaves falling from the trees in brilliant reds and golds. It should have been a beautiful day. I had just returned from a quick trip to the grocery store. I had taken Ethan with me, unwilling to leave him alone with my family any longer than absolutely necessary. As we pulled into the driveway, I heard shouting from inside the house. My heart sank. Victoria was home. She was supposed to be at a friend's house all weekend, and I had been looking forward to 2 days of relative peace. We walked into the house, grocery bags in hand. Victoria was in the kitchen, rummaging through the cabinets with increasing frustration. She turned when she heard us enter, her face flushed with anger. "Where's the money?" "What money?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. She had been trying to borrow money from me for a concert ticket, and I had refused. "Don't play dumb. I need $200. Give it to me." "I don't have $200 to give you." "Victoria." Her eyes narrowed. "Yes, you do. I know you've been saving tips. Hand it over." "No." The word hung in the air between us. In all the years of abuse, I had rarely said no directly to her demands. She stared at me, shocked, and then her face contorted with rage. "You selfish bitch. After everything this family has done for you, and you can't even loan me a little money. You never pay me back. It's not a loan. It's theft." She stepped toward me, her fists clenched. Ethan whimpered and pressed himself against my leg. "What did you just call me?" "I called it what it is." Victoria's face went red. She looked around wildly, her eyes landing on Ethan. Before I could react, she grabbed him by his shirt collar and yanked him away from me. He yelped in fear and pain. "Maybe if you spent less money on this little brat, you'd have money for your family." she snarled. She dragged Ethan toward the door. I dropped the grocery bags and followed, my heart racing. Let him go. Victoria. She pulled him out onto the front porch, still gripping his collar. Ethan was crying now, trying to pull away from her. I could see Mrs. Martinez in Harriart, her watering can frozen in mid-air as she watched the scene unfold. You want to know what your problem is? Sarah Victoria shouted. You had this worthless kid and it ruined your life, and now you take it out on the rest of us. Maybe if you had given him up like you should have, you wouldn't be such a miserable failure. Ethan was sobbing, struggling against her grip. She gave him a violent shake, his head snapping back and forth. Stop crying. You little crybaby. Victoria. Let him go right now. I lunged forward to grab him. That's when she hit him. Her open palm connected with his face with a crack that echoed across the quiet suburban street. The force of the blow sent Ethan stumbling backward. His foot caught on the edge of the porch step, and he fell hard onto the concrete walkway below, his head making a sickening thud as it hit the ground. For a moment, everything stopped. Ethan lay motionless on the concrete, a bright red handprint blooming on his cheek. Then he started to scream, a high-pitched wail of pain and fear that tore through me like a knife. I was down the porch steps in an instant, scooping him up, checking his head for blood. There was a bump forming already, and his cheek was swelling. But more than the physical injuries, it was the look in his eyes that broke me. Pure terror. He didn't understand why his aunt hated him so much, why the adults in his life hurt him, why he couldn't be safe even in his own home. I looked up at Victoria, who was standing on the porch looking defiant but also slightly shocked, as if she hadn't quite meant to hit him that hard. I looked at Mrs. Martinez, who had dropped her watering can and had her hand over her mouth, her face pale, and I made a decision. No more waiting. No more gathering evidence. This ended now. I pulled my phone out of my pocket with shaking hands and dialed 911. Victoria's eyes went wide. What are you doing? I ignored her. The dispatcher answered. 911. What's your emergency? My voice was surprisingly steady. My sister just assaulted my 4-year-old son. She struck him in the face and he fell and hit his head on concrete. I need police and child protective services at my location immediately. Ma'am, is your son conscious? Is he bleeding? He's conscious. He has a head injury and facial bruising. He's in severe distress. I gave them the address while Victoria started screaming at me, calling me every vile name she could think of. My parents came running out of the house, my father's face already turning red with rage. What the hell are you doing? Sarah, what I should have done months ago, I said coldly. I'm protecting my son. Mrs. Martinez had put down her watering can and was walking across her yard toward us. I saw everything, she said loudly, her voice carrying. I saw Victoria strike that child, and I saw him fall. I'll testify to whatever the police need. My father tried to bluster, tried to intimidate, but for the first time I didn't care. The police arrived within 7 minutes. 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female, both with serious expressions. I showed them Ethan's injuries. I showed them the video I had recorded on my phone of Victoria hitting him. I played them a brief clip from that morning of Victoria threatening me and calling Ethan names. The female officer, Officer Rodriguez, knelt down to talk to Ethan while her partner spoke with Victoria and my parents. Mrs. Martinez stood by my side, ready to give her statement. Within an hour, CPS arrived. Jennifer Reeves, the social worker I had been talking to, showed up with another caseworker. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and determination. Sarah, tell me you have what we talked about. I nodded. Everything, every incident, every threat, every moment of abuse. It's all documented. Multiple backups. Ready to submit. Her expression hardened. Then let's finish this. What followed was the longest day of my life. They interviewed me. They interviewed Ethan with a child psychologist present. They interviewed Mrs. Martinez. They interviewed my father, mother, and Victoria, who all tried to claim I was a mentally unstable woman making false accusations because I was bitter about my life. But then I showed them my evidence. All of it. Hours of video footage. Days of audio recordings. Weeks of detailed journal entries. Photographs of bruises, burns, and injuries. Financial records showing the exploitation. Everything. The CPS workers' faces grew grimmer as they reviewed the material. The police officer's jaws tightened. Even the child psychologist, who had surely seen terrible things in her career, looked disturbed. Victoria was arrested that evening and charged with assault and battery of a minor, multiple counts of child abuse, and child endangerment. The police also filed charges against my father for assault with a deadly weapon, referring to the boiling water incident, and against my mother as an accessory to child abuse. Ethan and I were placed in emergency protective housing that night. The shelter was clean but institutional, with thin walls and a shared bathroom. But it was safe. For the first time in years, I lay down to sleep knowing that no one would hurt us in the night. The legal battle that followed was brutal. My family hired expensive lawyers. They tried every tactic possible. They claimed I was mentally unstable, that I had fabricated the evidence, that I had coached Ethan. They painted me as a vindictive daughter who resented her successful younger sister. They brought up my single motherhood, my low-income job, my lack of prospects, as if any of that justified what they had done. But Elizabeth Harding was brilliant. She systematically destroyed every argument they made. She brought in technology experts who verified that the videos hadn't been edited or fabricated. She brought in child psychologists who testified about Ethan's trauma and the consistency of his statements. She brought in Mrs. Martinez, whose clear, detailed testimony corroborated everything I had documented. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed. Some of my extended family members came, many of them shocked to learn what had been happening. Some of my parents' church friends came, confident that Richard and Eleanor couldn't possibly be guilty of such things. But as the evidence mounted, day after day, I watched their certainty crumble. The most powerful moment came when the judge played the audio recording from the boiling water incident. The entire courtroom heard my father's voice, dripping with venom, calling me a worthless piece of trash, a broke whore, telling me I had no rights, that I was less than nothing. They heard my mother casually saying that accidents happen when trash competes with beauty. They heard Victoria's cruel laughter. Several people in the gallery audibly gasped. I saw one of my aunts start crying. I saw my parents' lawyer's face fall as he realized there was no defending this. When the verdict came, it was everything I had hoped for and more. Victoria was sentenced to 18 months in jail, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay substantial restitution for Ethan's therapy and medical expenses, an amount that would take her years to pay off. She was forbidden from any contact with Ethan until he turned 18, and even then only if he chose to allow it. My father was convicted of assault and endangerment. He received a suspended sentence, but was placed under strict probation for 5 years, ordered to attend anger management and parenting classes, and prohibited from any contact with Ethan for a minimum of 5 years. If he violated any terms of his probation, he would serve 2 years in prison. My mother was convicted as an accessory. She received similar terms to my father, along with a substantial fine. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had clearly been disturbed by the evidence, made a point of telling my mother that her willful indifference to her grandson's suffering was particularly reprehensible. But the legal consequences were only part of the fallout. The trial was covered extensively by local news. A particularly enterprising reporter wrote a detailed article about the case, including excerpts from the audio recordings and descriptions of the video evidence. It was picked up by several larger news outlets and went viral on social media. My parents' carefully constructed reputation disintegrated overnight. They were shunned by their church community. My father was asked to resign from the board of his golf club. My mother's book club uninvited her. Their longtime friends stopped calling. Extended family members who had attended the trial spread the word to those who hadn't. And soon, everyone knew exactly what kind of people Richard and Eleanor were behind closed doors. Victoria's life imploded. Her social media accounts, which she had curated so carefully to portray a glamorous, enviable life, were flooded with thousands of hateful comments. People she had gone to high school with shared the news articles with scathing commentary about what a terrible person she had always been. Her boyfriend broke up with her. Her friends abandoned her. She lost her job before she even went to prison because her employer didn't want the negative publicity. As for me and Ethan, we moved to a different state, to a medium-sized city where nobody knew our story. With the restitution money from the criminal case and the substantial settlement from the civil suit Elizabeth had filed on our behalf, I was able to afford a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. I found work at a nonprofit organization that helped domestic violence survivors navigate the legal system and find resources. My own experience made me effective at the job, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was doing something meaningful, something that mattered. Ethan started therapy immediately with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. It was slow, difficult work. He had nightmares. He was afraid of adults. He flinched at loud noises. But gradually, month by month, I watched my son begin to heal. The fear left his eyes. His shoulders relaxed. He started smiling again. Real smiles that lit up his face. He made friends at his new school. He joined a soccer team. He discovered he loved to draw and filled notebook after notebook with colorful pictures of superheroes and spaceships and dinosaurs. He was becoming the child he should have always been allowed to be. I started therapy too. I had to work through years of trauma, years of psychological abuse that had convinced me I was worthless. My therapist helped me understand that what had happened wasn't my fault, that staying as long as I did didn't make me weak, that I had been systematically broken down by people who should have loved and protected me. It took time, but slowly I began to rebuild my sense of self. I started to believe that I had value. I made friends at work. I went on a few dates, though I wasn't ready for anything serious. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned years ago. I took a painting class. I joined a book club. I learned to exist as a person again, not just as a victim or a survivor, but as someone with interests and dreams and a future. 2 years after we left, I heard through distant relatives that Victoria had been released from prison. She was living in a different state, working a minimum wage job, struggling to survive. Her beauty hadn't saved her. Her charm hadn't protected her. She was alone, marked forever by her criminal record, unable to escape the consequences of her cruelty. My parents were still in the same house, but it might as well have been a mausoleum. They had aged dramatically. My father's hair gone completely white, my mother's face drawn and haggard. They lived in isolation, their social circle reduced to nothing, their relationship with extended family strained beyond repair. I heard they blamed me for everything, never once accepting responsibility for their own actions. I felt nothing for them, not satisfaction in their suffering, not pity, not anger, just nothing. They were strangers to me now, people I had once known who had revealed themselves to be monsters. They had no place in my life or in my thoughts. One Saturday afternoon in our new city, Ethan and I went to the park near our apartment. It was one of those perfect autumn days, the kind where the air is crisp and clean and the sun is warm without being too hot. The leaves were changing colors, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. Ethan was on the swings, pumping his legs and laughing as he went higher and higher. I sat on a nearby bench, watching him, feeling a peace I had never known was possible. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Jamie from work, inviting us to a barbecue the following weekend. I smiled and replied that we would love to come. Ethan jumped off the swing at the peak of its arc, landing in the mulch with a soft thud and a triumphant yell. He ran over to me, his face flushed with joy, his eyes bright. "Mom, did you see how high I went? I went so high. I saw. Baby, you were amazing." He threw his arms around me, squeezing tight. "Mom, you're the best mom in the whole world. I'm so glad we don't live in that scary house anymore. I'm so glad it's just us now." I held him close, feeling the solid warmth of him, my beautiful, resilient boy who had survived so much and was finally getting to be a child. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As we sat there together, the afternoon sun filtering through the leaves and casting dappled shadows across the playground, I realized something profound. The greatest revenge wasn't making them suffer, though they were certainly suffering. The greatest revenge was this building a life so full of love and peace and happiness that they became completely irrelevant. It was proving that their assessment of me had been wrong, that I was strong and capable and worthy. It was raising my son in an environment where he learned that love wasn't supposed to hurt, that family wasn't supposed to be a source of fear, that he deserved respect and kindness and safety. They had tried to destroy me. They had tried to break me down into nothing, to make me believe I was worthless, trash, undeserving of even basic human dignity. But I had survived. More than that, I had escaped, and I had made sure they faced consequences for what they had done. I wasn't the same person who had cowered in that house, who had absorbed their abuse and believed she deserved it. I was someone new, someone forged in fire and fury, someone who had fought back and won, not just for myself, but for my son. And that, more than any legal victory, more than any social ostracism they faced, more than any prison sentence or fine, that was the real triumph. I had reclaimed my life. I had reclaimed my son's childhood. I had reclaimed my future. They were my past, and I was done looking back. So here's my question to you. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have left sooner or stayed longer? Do you think I was too harsh or not harsh enough? Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect yourself or someone you love? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about the importance of standing up for yourself and protecting those who can't protect themselves, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and survival. Your support helps these stories reach people who might need to hear them. Thank you for listening.